The ontological argument defines God as the greatest conceivable being, and proponents of the argument assert that existence is a great-making property. Since God is the greatest conceivable being, he must have all great-making properties to their maximum degree. And since existence is such a property, God must therefore exist. However, Immanuel Kant was not convinced that existence is really a property or even a predicate, and there is also the issue of how exactly one is to judge whether any property is or is not a great-making property.
My question is, by what objective methods can we use to determine what are greater-making properties by which we use to define God, and how we could use these methods to uncover existence as a greater-making property to respond to Immanuel Kant's refutation that existence is not a property at all?
Okay, there's a couple of questions going there. Even if existence isn't a property, I think we can say that necessary existence is greater than contingent existence.
If existence is not a property, then how could necessary existence be a property? And on what basis can we judge necessary existence to be greater than contingent existence? What objective reason do we have to believe that existence is greater than non-existence?
Something that's contingent doesn't have to exist. And its existence is usually dependent upon something outside of it that is a cause of it. But in the case of necessary existence, this is surely a great-making property, because this sort of thing must exist. In any possible world, this thing will exist. And that would be greater than something that just happens to exist in some possible worlds, but not all.
Why? On what standard is this judgment based?
But in regard to your more general question, I think it's going to be a matter of basic intuitions, just what seems to be great-making to you, as opposed to not.
So is there an objective standard or isn't there? Is greatness subjective for some properties and objective for other properties?
And some things surely are great-making properties, like omnipotence. A being that is all-powerful is surely greater than a being that is weak and limited in power. A being that's omniscient, knows everything, would be greater than a being that is ignorant. On the other hand, is it greater to be timeless than temporal? That's far from obvious, I think. That's not clear. Is it greater to be simple rather than composite? Again, that's not clear to me. So in many cases, it could well be the case that we're not certain what is great making. But the ones that Planning have picked, a being that is omniscient, omnipotent, and morally perfect, those are surely all great-making properties. A being that has those is greater than a being that is limited in strength, limited in knowledge, and morally imperfect.
So how do you define great-making? What does it mean to say that any properties are great-making properties? Even if you believe that omnipotence and omniscience are great-making properties, why is existence a great-making property? Also, to say that God is morally perfect is tautological and meaningless if God's essence is the standard by which you judge whether something is moral, which is the case with Craig. If God is your standard of morality, then saying that God is perfectly moral is the same as saying that God is perfectly God. It's an entirely vacuous assertion. What's worse is that since God is Craig's standard of goodness, I also suspect that God is Craig's standard of greatness. I suspect that he believes properties to be great-making insofar as they are properties of God. If this is the case, then when Craig says that necessary existence is greater than contingent existence, what he really means is that necessary existence is more godly than contingent existence. If Craig has a standard of greatness that is not based in God's nature, I'd like to know what it is. If God is the standard of greatness, then saying that God must exist because existence is a great-making property is the same as saying God must exist because existence is a property of God, and the argument is entirely circular.